Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. I call the Space Court Foundation to order. Welcome to our first intern orientation. My name is Chris Hearsey, and I am the co-founder and chair of the board of directors for the Space Court Foundation. The Space Court Foundation is a 501c3 educational nonprofit that promotes and supports space law and policy education and the rule of law. The Space Court Foundation produces educational materials and scholarship through the administration of two major projects, Stellar Decisis and the Space Court Law Library. The Foundation engages in partnerships and collaborations that help grow greater awareness of space law and how disputes in space may be resolved as humans venture further from the Earth in the not-too-distant future. Before we begin, I would like to say a few words about why and how the Space Court Foundation came to be. 2 years ago, I called my friend and colleague Nathan Johnson with an idea, a thought about the future of space law and our profession. Two important ideas came from that conversation. First, we both believed that education and networking are critical to professional development. Second, we concluded that we could make an impact in the community by bringing together students and young professionals in a nonpartisan way. Drawing on our experiences, we designed our programs to bring together the space community and achieve the broadest reach through the development of a research and educational program that considers one basic question: what is the law? More specifically, what are the rules that govern space activities? From this basic approach, we have built up a talented team of young professionals and students that will engage in that very basic exercise. Like courts in general, we have designed our research program to consider, much like moot court competitions do, what is the law and what are the facts applicable to the law. We have placed this important program in what we call the Space Court Law Library. The Space Court Law Library brings together scholars and students to work on 4 major projects: the International Yearbook of Space Activities, the Space Court Law Library website, the Space Law Dictionary Online, and Space Law Archive projects. Through these programs, we will produce an analysis and scholarship that will outline the corpus of space law from the perspective of treaties, general principles of law, and custom. Our editorial committee and interns will make contributions utilizing a unique approach. What would a court do? What interpretive methods should be applied to the law? What patterns arise in how actors create rules for space activities, and how should courts apply those rules? We have much work to do, and I'm excited to lead this effort with our Director for Legal Affairs and Research, Nivedita Raju. Along with myself and Nivi, we manage our interns with our internship coordinator, Julia Malette. Our internship program is designed for a student and young professional to make meaningful contributions to the study and research of space law. You do not need to be a law student to apply, and all nationalities are welcome. Successful applicants will have a 1-year renewable internship with the foundation, but we can tailor research projects based on the intern's interests and time commitment. I am pleased to announce that we currently have 10 interns in our program, and we are growing every day. Our program today is the first step in the beginning of a major research and education program, but we want to ensure our interns have the opportunity to see a broad picture of the space community and the many ways into the community and the different opportunities that are out there for employment. Given our shared circumstances, we believe it is important to share with you the best and brightest in the space law community to discuss how they entered the profession and provide helpful advice as many of you watching today think where your careers could lead and what opportunities exist in advancing those ambitions. Today, we have an exciting lineup of speakers who have established themselves in unique ways in the space law community. Please note that all of our speakers today are speaking in their personal capacity. For our first panel, our officer, Julia Malette, will moderate the Government Careers in the Space Community panel. Julia is joined by Gabriel Sinney from the US State Department, Sabrina Jawed and Kirsten Haugen from the FAA, and Jessica Deihl from NASA. I will moderate our second panel on commercial careers in the space community. I'm joined by Joita Chatterjee from Airbus, Kelsey McBaron from Schroeder Law, Brad Powell from Aiken Gump, and Julie Giroux from SpaceX. Our keynote speakers today will have some interesting perspectives on how they built their careers in space law. Our first keynote speaker is Jessica Noble, who will discuss her career path and what it is like to be a general counsel to a major space company. Our second keynote speaker is Daniel Porras, who will provide an international perspective and discuss the opportunities young professionals and students have to break into the space law community. I believe in all cases that you will find their stories inspirational, informative, and a testament to perseverance. Before I turn this over to Nathan, I would also like to thank our officers who worked behind the scenes to set up today's program: Leticia Zarkan, Julia Malette, Christian Meza, and Sean Case. Finally, for more information about our mission, programming, and internship program, we ask that you visit our website at spacecourtfoundation.org. I now turn the program over to our Executive Director, Nathan Johnson. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, my name is Nathan Johnson, and I am co-founder and Executive Director of the Space Court Foundation. First, I want to take a moment to thank people for joining us from wherever they are all across the globe. Everybody is participating from a different time zone. I myself am participating from 6 a.m. on the Pacific US, and we have guests speaking from the Eastern US to Central Europe to India and Asia Pacific. So from wherever you are, thank you for joining us. Chris and I started the Space Court Foundation to promote space law and space law education. It stemmed from our mutual experiences as law students and young professionals. For me, it started when I participated in the Space Law Moot Court competition. That was the first time that I got to meet other law students who were also interested in this area of law, and I got to learn about their backgrounds, where they were coming from, but also what they were studying at their school and what resources they had available to them. And I realized that even in the US, there were a lot of differences, not only in people's backgrounds, but in what people had available to work with. Since that moot court competition, I've participated in international organizations. I've met law students and young professionals from all over the world, and I've just realized the breadth and diversity of viewpoints that are out there, but also the inequality of resources that are available to everyone. And that is part of what we want to address with the Space Court Foundation. We want to make the same resources available to as many law students and young professionals as possible. But not only that, we want to help law students and young professionals grow their careers, because Chris and I both found certain gaps in career development and opportunities that were available to us, either as law students or as professionals just entering the workforce. So I want to talk a moment also about the opportunities that are out there, even outside of the Space Court Foundation. Let me go back to the Space Law Moot Court competition. I am now regional organizer for the Manfred Lach Space Law Moot Court competition in North America. The competition is global. We also have regions in Latin America, Europe, Africa, and Asia Pacific. The competition is an annual one. It starts in August with the publication of the problem. Then law students in teams of 2 to 3 are supposed to prepare arguments for both the applicant and the respondent. You'll file memorials for both sides in your region, and then you'll get to the in-person oral argument portion of the competition. Here, you'll get to argue in front of actual practitioners and space law experts, and you'll also get to meet other students, which is one of the most exciting aspects. As I said, it started my journey and interest. And not only do you get to meet students in your region, but if you win, you get to move on to the international competition, which is held concurrent with the International Astronautical Congress. Now, of course, this past year, much of the competition was virtual, and this year, the international round will also be virtual. But for 2021, I know that all the regions are planning for both an in-person competition or a virtual competition, whichever one becomes necessary. It's still a great opportunity to develop yourself, develop your arguments, and as I said, to meet other students and other practitioners, to start growing your network, much the same way that Chris and I did. If you want to learn more about the moot court competition, you can go to the website iislweb.org/lax_moot, and you can find information about all the regions. If you want to talk to me about North America specifically, you can email laxmoot-northamerica@iislweb.org. There are, of course, other opportunities and organizations such as the Space Generation Advisory Council, which is for young professionals under the age of 35. They host multiple events around the world in individual regions, but they also host the Fusion Forum, concurrent with the Space Symposium in Colorado Springs. And they also host the Space Generation Congress, which occurs right before the International Astronautical Congress. SGAC is one of the ways that I met your next speaker, McLee Kerolle. I have gotten to know McLee over the past couple of years. I feel lucky to know him, and I feel especially lucky to have him as our Director of International Outreach and Diversity. Thank you, McLee.
Morning and afternoon, everyone. Happy to have you here. Long story short, I'm a New Yorker that got my law degree at CUNY, and I got my Air and Space Law Master's in the Netherlands. I do work for the international space law community on two different fronts. One with SGAC, that Nathan said, and where I'm the part of the Diversity and Action team. And second, as part of the Caribbean Space Society. And if you can't see, obviously I'm Black. So it's fitting that I have the title for Director of International Outreach and Diversity, because it's a unique path that brought me here. It shouldn't be a unique path though, because the space sector is inherently global. Yet navigating the career aspect of the space industry would have you thinking otherwise because of regulations like ITAR and EAR that a lot of us have had to deal with. Believe me, I know. And for all the students watching, I'm not far removed from you all. I graduated from school 5 years ago and passed my bar exam 3 years ago. That's probably why I'm part of the Space Foundation, because all of us know deep down that there isn't a preset trajectory for success in the space industry. It's a niche field already, and extremely niche if you're not an engineer or business-minded. We've all been in your shoes, and as a result, we're paying it forward with resources and opportunity. While SGAC is a great outlet to network, Space Court Foundation is a great outlet to intern and get experience. Idealistically, space law is a glue holding the industry together from really becoming the wild, wild west. A lot of space law experts call it that. Realistically, developments around the globe may have you think that the rule of law is holding the industry by a string. As always, truth is somewhere in the middle. So that's why it's important we get as many people involved in the space industry. It's a power in the numbers thing. For those familiar and unfamiliar with the Outer Space Treaty, at Space Court Foundation, we truly believe that space is for the benefit of all mankind. So to all the interns and future interns watching, we're happy to have you here, and we're happy to make sure that you make it stay that way. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nivedita. Some of you know me as Nivi. I'm Director of Legal Affairs and Research at the Space Court Foundation. I'm a lawyer focusing on space policy, specifically space security and sustainability. Initially, I worked at an aviation law firm in Mumbai for a few years before moving to McGill University to focus exclusively on the regulation of outer space. At McGill, I have steered several research initiatives in this area, including working with the US Federal Aviation Administration on the regulation of cross-border suborbital flights between the US and Canada. I have also worked extensively on the Miller-Morse project, that is the Manual on International Law applicable to military uses of outer space, which we aim to publish early next year. I joined Chris and Nathan because I strongly believe in their vision of making space law and space education accessible. International law and space law are esoteric subjects that need to be broken down and analyzed. And we aim to do so at Space Court by conducting research, presenting it in a simplified format, and also with the nuance that is required to engage in these sometimes difficult conversations. And we need your help, the interns, in achieving this objective. We have a number of exciting research projects lined up, including the yearbook, which will form a part of the Space Court Law Library project that Chris mentioned. Through these projects, we would encourage you to explore your own areas of interest in space law and policy. Chris and I are also currently developing research guides to assist you and support you with your research with us. And this would allow you to collect data and classify the material accordingly. I would like to emphasize that Space Court is an inclusive environment, and echoing the sentiments of McLee, we here do believe that space is indeed for the benefit of all, and we encourage applicants and expressions of interest from all backgrounds. We also have an incredible internship coordinator, Julia, and I'll hand this over to her shortly. But in the meantime, I simply wanted to say to the current interns, welcome again, and to prospective interns, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Hello, everyone. And again, whatever time zone it is that you're tuning in, we're very happy to have you here. My name is Julia Malette, and I am serving as the intern coordinator with the Space Court Foundation. I'm a recent graduate of George Washington University Law School. So for those of you currently studying or studying for the bar, I was not too long ago in your shoes, and I'm very excited to be working in this capacity with students and young professionals who want to continue looking into space law issues. As everyone already mentioned, accessibility is really important to us at the Space Court Foundation. So as an intern, you will be really helping bring that process to be, so that soon anyone who has an interest in space law and policy will be able to find information, access it, understand it. And so our interns are very crucial in making sure that these goals that we have for accessibility in a global space community actually come to be. I want to talk a little bit about the internship program. Again, it is open to all, and so you can actually apply on our website, form to fill out. We also ask that you send a copy of your resume or CV, as well as your a writing sample and a letter of reference if possible. And then we do generally do internships on a more informal basis. So our current interns are researching anywhere between 8 to 60 hours per month, depending on their availability. And so again, we want to make this process flexible for our current interns. Everyone areas of space law that you particularly want to dive into or study or become an expert in. There's so many things that we need to look at and bring together. And so fortunately, there's an opportunity pretty much for any area of interest for you to focus your research on. We ask interns to check in virtually at least twice per month on their research. And then starting next month, we will be having monthly cafes, which are just sort of voluntary get-togethers for the interns, where we can discuss our various research projects, talk about current events, and otherwise build that global community that and that we hope to achieve through the Space Court Foundation. So before I end this session and turn it over to our great panels, I just want to give a shout out to some of our current interns who have already started working with us, and let our panelists know about the wonderful caliber of people. We have interns currently serving from 4 different countries and 3 different continents. And so even as we are just getting this process started, we're very happy that we have garnered interest from around the globe. So I'm just going to go through alphabetical order with our current interns. First, we have Sylvia Beghi. She's graduated in law from the University of Pisa in 2017 with a specialization in international and European law. She got a master's in space institutions and policies at the Italian Society for International Organization in Rome, and has also interned with the Association for Services and Applications for Space. She's a space enthusiast and hopes to have a future career in a space sector. We welcome her as an intern. Next, we have Martin Fisher, who got his bachelor's from the University of Michigan in sports management, and then went on to spend several years working as a mediator and has a master's in conflict resolution. He's currently at Nebraska Law, concentrating in space cyber, and he aspires to be a mediator of the moon and help peacefully resolve outer space disputes. Next, we have Bailey McMillan, who was born and raised in Hereford, Texas. He went to Simpson College in Iowa, and he is currently at his 2nd year at the University of Nebraska College of Law, also focusing on space. Our next intern is Sarah Mears, who's a third-year law student at University of Nebraska College of Law. She is focusing on space, cyber, and telecommunications, and is also the president of the student club. She also was on the Manfred Locke's moot court team. She has worked with privacy issues and international and national satellite laws in the past, and is particularly interested in the issue of space security. She hopes to publish her thoughts on the ever-evolving field of space security before graduating in May of 2021. Next, we have Julie Deihl, who's a PhD candidate from the University of Toulouse. She's writing her thesis in space law about appropriation in outer space. She specialized in international law and holds an LLM in the field from Sept University College of Law in Florida, and a master's degree in international economic law obtained from the University of Toulouse. Julie is currently studying for the New York Bar and aspires to become a space lawyer in the United States. And finally, we have Mr. Sajal Sharma. He's a senior assistant professor of law at the School of Law, University of Petroleum and Energy Studies in Dehradun, India. He obtained his law degree and went on to complete his LLM with a specialization in intellectual property laws from the Department of Law, University of North Bengal. He particularly developed his interest in space law after the passing of the U.S. Space Law Competitiveness Act in 2015. He's currently pursuing his PhD in the area of developing commercial rights in outer space activities with special reference to intellectual property rights. So again, we have a wonderful array of interns who have already began working with us and researching with us. We encourage any prospective interns to please consider applying, because it is a rolling process. Also, if you are interested in taking an internship for credit, we're happy to work with your school and making sure that happens. Finally, if you have any questions before applying, you can always email me. My email is julia.malette@spacecourtfoundation.org. So with that, I believe I will Chris briefly, and then I believe we will start our panels. Welcome, panelists. So our first panel is opportunities in government. And so we wanted to highlight for our interns, the different possibilities and career paths that are available. So we have a wonderful group of panelists with us today. I will briefly read their introductions, and then I will turn it over to each panelist to talk for about 5 minutes. And then finally, we will have an opportunity for Q&A. So if you can, please put your questions in the Q&A box, and then I will read the questions to the panelists. So first, we are joined by Gabriel Sinney, who is an attorney advisor with the U.S. Department of State, where he handles international delegation to the COPUOS Legal Subcommittee in the U.S. National Space Council on all issues relating to international space law. He works closely with NASA on legal aspects of the Artemis program and is one of the architects of both the Artemis Accords and the recent executive order regarding space resources. He's a member of the negotiating team tasked with ensuring cooperation on the Gateway, a small station that will orbit the moon. He has practiced international law for the Department of State for 13 years and is a frequent speaker on space law and policy. Welcome, Gabriel. We will also be joined today by Jessica Deihl, who works at NASA headquarters in the Office of Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs, on space policy legislation and other congressional matters related to international partnerships, interagency partnerships, procurements, legal, and STEM education. Prior to joining OLIA, Jessica worked with NASA Goddard's Office of Chief Counsel, where she served as the lead center attorney for partnerships and focused on a wide variety of government, contract, and fiscal law issues, including interagency and space act agreements. Jessica originally joined NASA as a Presidential Management Fellow, supporting the commercial spaceflight program on the commercial crew, and she detailed to the Federal Aviation Administration's Office of Chief Counsel, where she supported the Office of Commercial Space Transportation on launch and reentry licensing, and also worked with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy as Special Assistant Counsel. She received her BA from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, and her Juris Doctor from American University, Washington College of Law. Welcome, Jessica. She also volunteers as a legal counsel for the Space Generation Advisory Council, which we have also mentioned here today. So thank you again, Jessica. Next, we're also joined by Kirsten Haugen, who's a regulatory attorney in the FAA's Airman Certification and Commercial Space Law branch. Prior to joining the FAA, she served as Assistant District Counsel for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in New England, where she practiced environmental, regulatory, and employment law. While living in Boston, she taught her first legal writing at New England Law. She's a graduate of University of Nebraska College of Law, member of the International Institute of Space Law, and volunteer at the Manfred Locke Space Law Moot Court Competition. Finally, we are joined by Sabrina Jawed, who is an attorney in the Airman Certification, Air Traffic, and Commercial Space Law branch of the Regulations Division in the Office of the Chief Counsel of the Federal Aviation Administration. She focused primarily on transportation and drone matters. Her work at the FAA includes developing regulations, addressing legislative, licensing, interagency and treaty issues, and identifying and coordinating enforcement matters. Prior to working with the FAA, Sabrina clerked for 1 year at the DC Superior Court for the Honorable Judge Russell F. Kanan, dealing primarily with criminal law matters. She received her law degree from American University, Washington College of Law in 2009, and her undergraduate degree from Duke University in 2006. She's admitted to the bars of the District of Columbia and New York. So again, welcome to this wonderful panel. I will turn it first, and then we will move on. Thank you.
So yeah, as you said in your introduction, my name is Gabriel Sinney. I'm an attorney advisor at the Department of State, and I handle sort of the general space law portfolio for our department. That means that I work not only with U.S. diplomats around the world and space policy folks in the department, but I also work closely with the rest of the interagency, the other people on the phone today, on the Zoom call, as well as the National Space Council. So what that looks like in practice is a couple of different things. It's negotiation, right, at the United Nations, at the Copious Legal Subcommittee, at the Copious Plenary, so sort of very traditional United Nations negotiations. I'm either sitting sort of behind the placard or sort of back chairing those conversations. I also work very closely with sort of direct bilateral partners and very closely with NASA when I do that. For things like Gateway, for things like the Artemis Accords, for lower profile but very important space cooperation activities that we do with other countries. All of that is typically wrapped up in either binding or non-binding international arrangements, so that's why the State Department has a significant role there. And of course, space is not just about science and exploration, but there's also a pretty significant international diplomacy aspect to it as well. So the State Department is involved in those things. The other part of what I do is much more behind the scenes, providing guidance, brainstorming. You know, when you work for government as a lawyer, some of what you do is answer very specific legal questions. But another thing that you do a lot is work closely with policy clients to think through how they get from where we are to where they want to be. Right? We'll hear what the goal is, and then we brainstorm on how to do that goal. So that's exactly where things like the Artemis Accords or the Executive Order on Space Resources came from. My own background, as you heard, I've been at the State Department for 13 years. We have an unusual system in State Department legal where we actually rotate through portfolios. So I've done a number of different things for the State Department on the legal side before coming to work on space exclusively, along with some other major science cooperation activities about 3 years ago. So, you know, although I've been a space nerd my whole life and have space camp and all kinds of, you know, all kinds of personal interest in space, I didn't start practicing this as a matter of my career until relatively recently. So you have a lot of other people who've been around the block a lot more than I have. I think that's one takeaway, though. I think if we're talking about career paths and advice for interns and things like that, is that there is no single path into space law and policy. At least that's what I found, sort of from my own perspective and from working with other people. In fact, I found that people who sort of try to go straight into space law and policy from the very beginning, that absolutely can succeed. It's certainly a possibility, But another effective path is to develop an actual expertise. In my case, that's international law, but for other people, it might be regulatory, it might be spectrum, it might be launch and reentry. It could be something much more general, like intellectual property or export controls. And you develop that expertise, and then you move sideways into the space law and policy world. So I think, if you're thinking about your own career and you're thinking about how to get into this world, which is a pretty small world still, there's not a huge number of jobs in this. I would say don't get discouraged if you can't get a space law job right off the bat. I think most of us didn't. You probably heard in the introduction. I would say, pick a substantive field that you enjoy, that you think you can add to, and then you can shift some of your practice over time, either through government or through private sector stuff. And then the last thing I'll say is that working for the government is different than working for private sector. It's different than working for a commercial entity or for, say, a law firm that has a space law practice. One thing about government is that your client is very different. On a day-to-day basis, you think of your client, or at least I think of my client, as the policymakers that I work with. But in a sort of broader sense, your client is the American people. So your goals are different, right? You're thinking not only about how to resolve particular matters, but you're thinking about intentionally creating precedent. You're looking forward 5 or 10 or more years to sort of think through what are the multiple steps down the line. So it's a very different kind of lawyering, I would say, than representing individual clients or representing individual companies on particular matters. And that's just something to think about when you design your own career. What kind of lawyer do you want to be? It feels very different to practice law depending on who your clients are. So I think I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, but you've got a lot of other panelists with a lot more experience than I, so I'll hand it over to them.
Thanks for that introduction, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks to the Space Court Foundation for asking us all to join you today. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. As they announced in my bio, I'm over at NASA. I work in the Office of Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs. My portfolio is largely international partnerships. And so my colleague Gabe, who you just heard from, works very closely. We've spent a lot of time in meetings the past few weeks working on the Artemis Accords. So grateful to have great colleagues. And as he's alluded to, it's somewhat of a small industry here. So the good news is that you all get to know each other. And so I would say the first thing I would recommend is networking. So if you're interested in getting into the field, definitely doing things like this today and hearing from folks in the field and getting to know other people in the field is a huge asset. As mentioned, there's not just one path to get in. I think Gabe had some great advice of, if you don't have your first career directly in a space law job, that you're able to focus in a specific discipline. But lots of other ways to get in. As they mentioned in my bio, I came into to NASA through the Presidential Management Fellowship Program, which is a great program. I would highly recommend that folks look into that as you're getting ready to graduate, if you are looking for ways to get into government service directly. For me, I started with the Commercial Spaceflight Program and was able to do detail opportunities. So one of the details I did was over with the FAA. So I got to know our colleague Sabrina, who's on the panel today, and work with her over there and gain experience, working in the legal office at FAA. I also had a chance to bounce around NASA a little bit and to get some legal experience in the commercial and intellectual property group at NASA before finishing the fellowship, where I then went on to work as counsel at Goddard Space Flight Center. So being an agency attorney at NASA is, I would say, more traditional legal work, at least working for the center. So I focused primarily on partnerships and on contract law. So, for folks, again, who specialize in any of those specific areas, there's always room where we're looking for folks who are expert in those fields to pull in. Enjoyed my work there, but now have moved over to doing some legislative work. So, there is opportunity to bounce around within the government, within the agencies that you work in. And so I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has on really any of the above topics. So thanks.
Hey, I'm Kirsten Haugen, nice to meet all of you in this fun virtual format. Yeah, as Julia read in my bio, I've been with the FAA for almost a year now. And I'm probably, assuming most of you guys are law students, I'm probably closest to where you sat. I graduated from the University of Nebraska College of Law in 2016. I developed an interest in space law as a student at Nebraska. I learned that space law was an option to study during my second year at the Manfred Lach's Space Law Moot Court competition, which I'm sure some of you have heard of at this point. Honestly, the concept of applying international law and just the massive and like wonderful problem that space poses as far as how do we use resources in a way that is like a collective action problem. How do we make sure that we are making space safe, safe and sustainable, and that we are making the best possible use of it to ensure a continued development of our own planet is just one of the most fascinating things to me. So I was thrilled by the possibility to try and get into space law itself, but as Gabriel correctly pointed out, it's a straight shot is very rarely the way there. So I actually, I started with the Army Corps of Engineers, and probably some of the best advice I could give any students and young professionals interested in getting into space law is that if you don't land with space right away, see what you can do to get a career that will use applicable skills that you can translate into the space field. I mean, my first gig was with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers doing environmental and regulatory law, and just getting my arms around how the Administrative Procedure Act works, how do these environmental principles, which neatly translate to some of the concepts that get behind how do we manage space traffic and space debris safely, those kind of work together. Understanding how a government agency works, how does an agency communicate with the people, how do we put out notice to the public and ensure that we are making the best use of public funds. These are all translatable concepts. So I was there for 3.5 years, and I joined the FAA about a year ago. I have been thrilled with my job ever since. I really, really enjoy it. And I guess some of the advice I would give is that if you are interested in pivoting your career specifically in that direction, do what you can, as both of the panelists have said so far, to network. I kind of loathe that word, but do what you can to meet people, because it is a really small community. I don't know if we've said this, but most of us panelists actually know each other. We've run in the same circles. We go to the same events. It's a small and niche community. So yeah, making yourself known out there and doing what you can to stay involved and to learn as much as you can about the growing industry will probably put you in the best situation to know what's out there. And if you are interested in going the government route, I said that for me, like one of the most rewarding aspects of our job right now is just that we get to, at least from the FAA, I really, really enjoy that we get to see the different commercial entities that are coming, like what are the different ideas that people are putting out there. We aren't necessarily tethered to one specific company's mission and objective. It's really neat to see kind of the future, what different companies are envisioning. And I really enjoy personally that when we work really, really hard on a week or a month or a whole year that seems extremely trying on particularly difficult projects, that at the end of the day, we get to sit back and say like, hey, like we did this because we care about public safety and we care about making sure that the US government stays compliant with its international norms and making sure we uphold the rule of law in the US government. So it's great, it's wonderful. And honestly, the field is small, but it's growing every day, especially as the US government is trying to figure out from a regulatory standpoint, how do we want to divvy up responsibilities among agencies going forward as industry continues to change and evolve. Now is, I would say, a really ripe time for attorney involvement. So keep your eyes out, and we're glad that you are interested. Thank you.
So I actually work in the same office as Kirsten. Just briefly, I specialized in administrative law in law school, and to again echo Gabriel's point, which I thought was such a great one, and one that I actually haven't heard on any career panels that I've been on before. It was my experience in administrative law that kind of got me my position at the FAA and allowed me to then further specialize in commercial space. When I started at the FAA, I did a variety of other work, including airman certification, air traffic, aircraft certification. But at the time, and this I will highlight later in terms of the growing industry that Kirsten was talking about and how the government is responding to that, at the time that I started at the FAA, we had one attorney who was working part-time, and her portfolio was all commercial space. So that gives you an idea of when I started, how many people at the FAA, the agency responsible for regulating commercial space transportation, which includes launch and reentry, was working the entire portfolio. And that's also reflective of how many launches and reentries the United States was regulating at the time. So as the industry continued kind of picking up, I was able to assist that attorney and start taking on more and more commercial space work. And here we are 10 so years later, and that is now kind of my sole focus. And we've gone from one attorney working part-time to now, I would say 3 attorneys working full-time and then a manager overseeing. Now, that may not sound like a lot over such a long period of time, but for the government, when you consider budgetary constraints, that's pretty significant. And so to Kirsten's point, we really are, the government really is growing in response to what they're seeing from industry in this field. So I think, you know, I'm going to talk just a little bit about the FAA to give you a better understanding of the agency. The FAA regulates, as I said, launch and reentry. We have a very unique mandate because we both encourage commercial space transportation, but we also protect the public. So to speak a little bit more about how the government is uniquely involved in commercial space, I would say that, to Kirsten's point, we do get this overview of what industry is doing, and we are very fortunate to be able to be involved in figuring out how best to enable industry to continue to grow while also protecting those uninvolved parties that may have a rocket land on their house if we don't step in to make sure that the launches and reentries are conducted in a safe manner. So what is great about government is you get to be involved on both sides of the house. And I think that especially from the FAA perspective, if you really enjoyed admin law, if you really enjoy writing, if you really enjoy reading, we get to write those regulations in our division that the industry then has to follow. And we get to oversee how those regulations are then exercised by industry. So not only are we putting the regs on the books, but we're answering questions when industry comes to us with a unique situation that's completely outside of what the regs may have contemplated. And we get to say, this is how these rules apply to you. We, in the legal office in particular, get to look at what our statutory authority is, how a new operation or a new concept may continue to operate under that statutory authority. And I think from both the commercial space side of the house and the drone side of the house, even though these things, especially rockets, have been around for quite some time, we're constantly dealing with new concepts. And so I still consider this area to be more along the lines of an emerging technology. And that's, for me, a really exciting thing, because it means that every day at work, you could be dealing with a new challenge, and a new legal challenge in particular. So that's just the regs division. In our chief counsel's office at FAA, we have divisions that are broken up based on subject area. So we also have contractors, contract attorneys rather, who may do work on some of our space stuff. We've got a litigation office that may be called in if, for example, there's an incident that requires litigation to be involved, or if we get challenged on something that we've done in a rulemaking or that we've made a determination on. I'm trying to think of other offices. We've got an enforcement division. All of this is just to illustrate the fact that there are, again, multiple different avenues by which you may use your skills to apply to the commercial space sector. And that's, I think, a really great thing. And, you know, we don't see today sort of some of the other agencies that are really involved, but when we talk about, again, the expansion of the commercial space industry and then the government's response, I would anticipate that the FCC is probably going to be looking for attorneys to deal with all of the spectrum issues and all of the small sat constellation issues that are coming forward. You know, even NOAA, I think, with these increased launches and these increased capabilities to sort of image the Earth, I really foresee a lot of these agencies seeking additional support to the extent that they're able on the commercial space side of the house, which is exciting. But I would again echo kind of my colleagues' points about making sure that you have a solid basis in an area of law that you can then translate, because commercial space law really covers the gamut, right? And I think somebody said this earlier: administrative, contracts law, international law. I'm sure there are a million others. You could leverage each of those areas. One piece of advice that I'll leave you with, I think my fellow panelists and friends have done a great job in giving you excellent advice. The only other thing that I can think of is always volunteer yourself to the extent that you can. If you find an opportunity, and there are many in this field, write a paper. Volunteer to assist in an ABA conference. There's so many conferences, and they still are continuing as demonstrated today, that you could volunteer to help with. I think that would help with your networking, as Jesse pointed out. It will help you get to know people better in the field, and it will help you kind of hone your skills going forward. And I think that that's always going to benefit you, even if your path into this field is not a straight one. So good luck. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. And thank you everyone for sharing some really great advice. I think with everyone here, including myself. But okay, so we're gonna get into some Q&A. I see a few people have put some questions into the Q&A chat. First question that I will bring up, and I will direct this one, I guess, first towards Jessica, but then anyone could take a crack at it. For someone who maybe has a background such as here, but is now looking into getting into space law, is that sort of a background going to be particularly helpful in getting into space law? So having that sort of engineering background.
So as we've sort of discussed on this panel, I think there are sort of many different ways to practice space law. And so I think depending on really what your portfolio ends up including, it certainly can be helpful. Of course, I don't come from an engineering background. And so I know many of my other legal colleagues do not, but particularly in the world of intellectual property, of course, having that sort of background is a huge asset, and in fact, required if you're going to do the IP bar. I know at least at NASA we have a huge portfolio of IP attorneys, and so certainly if that's a path that you're looking to go down, that is always in demand in the field. So definitely can certainly be an asset.
All right, and we have a few questions from students who are wondering if they're studying or they're an international student, what steps would they need to take to either work for the U.S. government or be involved with U.S. space policy? And I'll open this up to anybody, whichever panelists would like to answer.
I guess I can kick us off unless somebody else wants to jump in. There are restrictions, especially in this field where there's lots of sort of export control rules, et cetera. And so it is somewhat difficult to work for the US government as a non-US citizen. One path I would recommend is that you take a look at what opportunities there might exist for you here in the US or here in DC, either with your embassy or your home space agency, because that might be something that you would be uniquely qualified to do that other folks here in the DC area or in the US wouldn't be qualified for. So you might have some unique opportunities available to you, not available to us. But I will say it has, from some colleagues and students who I've spoken to who have been trying to get into the U.S. government as a foreign citizen, it can be quite difficult. So I do sympathize with that, and turn it over to my colleagues for any other suggestions.
Yeah, I know everything Jessica said is right. The only other thing I'd add, or just to sort of expand on the idea of looking to your home country, we've seen an absolute explosion in the establishment of space agencies around the world in the past, not just in the past year, but certainly in the past 3 or 4 years. I think I could count at least 10 countries that have established space agencies just in the past 3 years. So just because your home country hasn't necessarily sort of had a space policy in the past, I definitely wouldn't write that off as a very real possibility. You know, these administrations and these rules are all being written now, really all over the world because of the rise of the commercial space industry, but also the increasing globalization of the space industry, right? Just like any other large industry, these things cross national borders, both on the commercial side and often on the international, the government side as well. So yeah, it's going to be hard to get into the U.S. government, but quite frankly, you know, I'm sometimes jealous of my colleagues in sort of newer countries that are newer to this, because they're in a place where they can really shape their national policies and laws from the absolute ground up. So I think that'd be a really exciting opportunity if you happen to come from a country that's looking at this now.
Thank you both. We only have just a couple minutes left for our panel, so I'm going to kind of combine 2 questions. We had a couple of questions about how helpful would it be to have an LLM, you know, particularly from some of the, institutions that are well known for space law LLMs, such as McGill or Leiden. And then there was a note that, you know, even in some recent NASA legal postings, it appears that an LLM may be required. So just asking, does having an LLM, I guess, give you a leg up? And is it possibly something that's going to be actually a kind of setting a bar or requirement for getting into government positions in the future? And again, I'll open it to anybody who has thoughts on that.
I'll start. So I actually considered getting an LLM myself as I was approaching graduation. I didn't end up going that route. I ended up just going straight into my legal career because I was just too anxious to start becoming an attorney at that point. So I would say that maybe even 5 to 8 years ago, the LLM seemed to be one of the most assured ways to actually land your way into space, because you could demonstrate that you'd studied the applicable international treaties that would be, that applied for space law. I think that right now, I can't speak to NASA, maybe Jessica can do more on that. I have not, for my friends who are in the space law community right now, I would say it's 50-50 on whether people have LLMs. And I think that to the point that everybody else has made at this point, the value that has also been really useful, especially if you want to go into government, if you have any applicable skills that can help you with administrative law, understanding, international concepts and basically agency work, that can be just as useful as far as getting your foot in the door. If you can demonstrate that you have the skills to go forward. If you want to work specifically in an academic context, I think the LLM would be extremely important, and you shouldn't kick that aside. But I just want to put it out there, though, that the LLM is not necessarily a prerequisite from my perspective. You can absolutely find companies and government agencies and nonprofits and think tanks that want to hire you based on your skills as an attorney and your knowledge of the law, even if you don't have an LLM.
I'll go ahead and jump in and expand on this. And I guess what might be helpful for our viewers is, by show of hands, for the space lawyers on this panel, how many of us have an LLM? So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but from at least the folks here, a lot of us have been able to get into the field without. I will say, certainly learning space policy is very valuable. And one of the things that the specifically targeted LLM programs do a great job of is networking with the industry. So if you're someone coming from, from a different field or from outside of the industry, certainly the LLM opportunity, really gets you involved and gives you a knowledge of what's going on here. Is the LLM the only way to do that? I would argue probably not, but certainly there's benefits to it.
All right, thank you all so much. I know we're running just a few minutes behind with the technical issues we've had today. So I think right now we're going to be taking just a short 5-minute break or so, and then we will be having another panel, which will be moderated by Chris. For those whose questions we didn't get to, I will do my best to answer in the chat. And again, the next panel, for those who are interested more in private sector opportunities, the next panel will be focusing on that. But I just want to thank our panelists. This was really wonderful. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to speak with our interns and with young professionals and prospective interns, you know, globally, who are all interested in space law and policy. So it's been wonderful to hear from all of you. Thank you again.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this. I just want to say that we have a great panel lined up today, and so why don't we just get into it? And I'd like to introduce everybody. First, let me introduce Joeita Chatterjee. Joeita is legal counsel at Airbus, where she advises on legal risk management to enhance in the international commercial space, satellite, and aviation markets. We also have Kelsey McBaron, who's an associate at Schroeder Law, PLLC, where she assists clients in the commercial space and national security fields with matters regarding regulatory compliance, risk management, insurance, export controls, contract drafting, and administrative law. All right, I hope all the students took note of what you need to do. We also have Brad. Brad Powell is an associate at the firm Aiken Gump, and he advises clients on commercial, regulatory, and policy matters at the intersection of international trade, technology, and national security. And last but certainly not least, Julie Giroux is counsel and senior contracts officer, and she is responsible, contracts officer at SpaceX, and she is responsible for the legal and contractual aspects of SpaceX's NASA portfolio, including NASA commercial crew, launch, lunar, and Mars contracts, and SpaceX agreements, as well as select subcontracts for commercial launch services. So first of all, let me say thank you and welcome you all again. And I think what we'll do is we'll start with Joeita. And Joeita, if you can maybe spend 5 minutes just talking about yourself and how you got into the commercial space world.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Chris. It's a pleasure. So, you know, was a completely geeky kid, and space had always been very fascinating for as long as I can remember. And as cliched as it sounds, it was always about being an astronaut as a 5-year-old. And then law school kind of almost accidentally happened. But to offer a quick recap of my training, I went to law school in India and then completed a master's program in aviation and space law from McLee University. And I suppose like many of our audience today, I started with an internship into private practice. And I started my career with a law firm in New York and eventually moved to London. And currently I'm part of the legal team at Airbus at its headquarters in the south of France. My practice area is essentially in asset finance with a focus on the aerospace industry. What that means is essentially legal risk management for transactions involving high value assets. And in this case, those assets tend to be satellites or airplanes. And on a day-to-day basis, that means having to review and negotiate contracts, making sure that the client is properly advised throughout the length of the transaction, making sure that their interests are protected. I suppose when it comes to private practice in space law, there are several routes one could follow depending on your interest. There's always, you know, corporate and finance transactions where you'd advise and counsel companies on a wide-ranging number of matters. It could be with acquisition of assets, debt management, quite a bit of bankruptcy and restructuring work that's going on in the current environment. Then there's regulatory and compliance procedures, which I suppose Brad is more qualified to comment on, but very briefly, you'd help your client to obtain licensing and permits. And in the US, that would mean working quite closely with the FAA and FCC. And then there's export control laws and public procurement regulations, which is again a very specialized and, might I add, quite a sought after area of expertise. So I don't want to take up too much time. And with that brief introduction to kind of life as a practitioner in the aerospace industry, I'm looking forward to answering questions.
All right, Kelsey.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelsey McBaron. I'm an associate at Schroeder Law. We are a law firm, as Chris said, that helps out commercial space clients, national defense or national security clients, and defense clients. So we do a wide range of things, but a little bit more about me. I went to Indiana University for my undergraduate degree. I ended up specializing in English and criminal justice. And then I went to California Western Law School. And while I was there, I really got interested in space law. Similar to Joyita, like I had always loved space as a kid and thought, okay, I'm gonna be an engineer. That's just what I'm gonna do. And then somewhere around 8th grade, I realized I can't do math. I'm just bad at it. My strong point is writing. So I kind of pivoted. And in my first year of law school, I just kind of started looking down this road and seeing what was out there. And it's really fascinating stuff. Like either, you know, whether you go international or domestic, like there's just so much going on and it's very fascinating. So from there, I just made it my mission to find a bunch of internships in this area. So my first internship was with Deep Space Industries, which was an asteroid mining company. Then I went and externed at the US Federal District Court of Southern California to get some, you know, lawyer experience. And then I went on to work at the FAA. I actually moved out to DC in the 3rd year of law school. And I was lucky enough to work with Sabrina, who was on the last panel. And that was just really, really cool stuff. It was, you know, they do all the stuff for launch, and that was fascinating to work at. So after that, I then moved back to California, took the bar exam, and then moved back to DC, where I worked at a satellite operator on their regulatory team. From there, I then went to a law firm called Fish & Richardson and worked on their regulatory team on space things, but also like some telecommunications and some other areas of law. And then most recently, I now work at Schroeder Law, and we do exclusively space stuff with a little bit of, you know, a little bit of other stuff thrown in, but mostly it's helping space clients, and that's been wonderful. So Schroeder Law is based in Washington, DC, and we do a wide range of stuff. We do provide advice on things like satellite and launch services procurement. We'll do contract drafting. We'll do licensing and regulatory issues, you know, digging in and figuring out what do these regulations mean and how they apply to me. And I think a big part of what we do is risk management. So that's figuring out what role you play in your space operation, and then where your exposures are, and the different tools you're going to use to make sure that if something goes wrong and you have a bad day, you're fully covered. So that's, you know, a summary of what I do. As far as advice, I also agree. I think just get involved in everything. I did something over the summer called International Space University, and they have a summer program where we went to Israel and we learned all about these different disciplines, because I don't come from an engineering background. So I wanted at least a basic knowledge of kind of what's going on and what are the different things that I need to know from all these different perspectives of space, whether it's, you know, the engineering part or the policy part, or, you know, finding out everything that I could about space, so that when I'm talking to clients, I know at least a starting point of what they come to us with, and then from there learning more. So just going to everything, talking to everyone. SGAC is another great organization to be a part of. Even when I was in California, I just ran around and found groups that did space things. I worked with this rocket project team at SDSU on their stuff, just because we were all students and it seemed cool, and we were doing, mini versions of what we eventually wanted to do. So that's kind of me. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end.
Great. Thank you, Kelsey. Brad, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to space law?
Sure thing. Thanks, Chris. Good to be chatting with everybody today. So I work at Aiken Gump. It's a global law firm. We've got about 900 attorneys, I think, across about 9 different countries. And I'm based in DC, like many of us in the space community. My practice area is pretty specific to international trade law, U.S. regulatory practice. So I focus on things like export controls, sanctions, foreign investment rules, and how does that relate to the space industry? So I'm working regularly with manufacturers, satellite and ground station operators, launch service providers, and then also investors, and then a few government entities as well. And they all come to us asking, their US-oriented regulatory questions. But I thought to kind of give you a sense of what that means, because it's really sort of like a space adjacent area of regulatory practice. It's not space law, in my opinion, as such, but we're working with our space clients day in and day out. So here are some examples, right? So this year, for instance, we had a UK investor come to us and say, hey, we want to get a controlling stake in this US remote sensing company. Is that going to fly, right? And their question was driving at the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS. You might have seen headlines about that recently with the TikTok deal going on. And so we served as their counsel through that CFIUS process and successfully navigated through that for them so that they could get their controlling investment in a US remote sensing company. Likewise, we had another satellite client come to us and say, hey, we want to take a stake in this non-US satellite telecommunications operator. Can you help us out there? Because it looks like that non-US company might have some risk exposure from an export controls and sanctions perspective based on their geographic footprint, where they did business, and their contracts with US suppliers that they were then, working with end users and countries of concern. And so we advised the investor in that deal to, on the front end, get good contract safeguards in place to protect them post-close. And then on the back end, coming out of that deal, which was also successful, doing a deep dive pursuant to one of our contract safeguards to ensure that their target company, the company that they just took a controlling interest in, cleaned up that regulatory risk. And so that was, that effort was a year-long effort to, on the front end and back end of that. And then, Chris alluded to in the intro, sort of more bigger picture policy advice that we provide our clients. We have a number of space companies who are asking us, hey, we want to expand. We want to look beyond the United States for our business and grow internationally and do interesting things in other jurisdictions. What does that look like for us? Today, tomorrow, 5 years from now, what do we need to be thinking about to be able to do what we want to do? And more often than not, international trade regulations and US restrictions come into play and the thinking about those long-term strategies. And so we help those clients both from sort of a compliance perspective. What does this look like now? Tomorrow, could we do what we want to do in X country? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, how do we get to a position where we can? What advocacy is needed? What interpretations of regulations are needed? And favorable advisory opinions might be needed. And so we work sort of hand in hand on a strategic level as well. And so those are just kind of 3 examples. I kind of focus more on the transactional sense, but maybe from a compliance regulatory sense, day in and day out, we're helping our clients in all industries, including the space industry, secure licensing, to Joyita's point. And so just recently, we helped an EU space client get a re-export license to share US satellite technology with one of their counterparties in a joint mission that involved a lot of international stakeholders. And they they were actually sharing that technology with their financer. They had to disclose a lot of information about the mission to the entity backing the mission that required an export license, in that case a re-export license. So that's sort of a sampling of how I help space industry clients. Just this morning, going back to the TikTok reference, we've got satellite operators asking us, how does this action that the Department of Commerce literally just rolled out around 8 a.m. Eastern time this morning affect us? Are we still going to be able to, transmit data that might be data of these entities that are sort of in the targets of the U.S. administration right now? So I hope that gives you a picture of what I do. How did I get here? The short version of that story, I went to law school in DC. I networked and took up sort of activities at the law school that would introduce me to space professionals. Julie here on the panel actually met through my participation in the Space Law Moot Court competition. So I did that in my second and third year of law school, and that was really a jumping off point for me to learn what practicing in this community could look like. I'm happy to talk more about that.
Great, thank you, Brad. Julie, I'm sure we're all excited to hear about what's going on at SpaceX and how you got there.
Sure, yeah, no, it's very exciting. Well, like other panelists and several others, I wanted to actually be an astronaut, but like others, math was not my forte, but writing was. And so I ended up going to law school. And I became, right now I'm counsel at SpaceX and also a senior contracts officer. I started in May '09 and in the legal office in DC, and then started the contracts officer position in Hawthorne in about October '09, and luckily got to keep that job that I created. And then I been there, I guess, 11 years now, and I basically manage our NASA government contract portfolio. So I handle all of the legal and contractual aspects of the CRS contract, which is the commercial resupply, which brings cargo to and science experiments to the space station and back. I also do that for the CCTCAP contract, which is bringing crew to station and back. I also work on the commercial lunar payload services contract, or CLIPS, which brings payloads to the moon, and they just stay there. And then the Gateway Logistics Services contracts, which will bring cargo to Gateway when that is completed. And then also the Human Landing System contract, which hopefully eventually will be bringing crew to the moon. So that's like the main focus area. So my focus area is mostly government contract law, which is its own little niche. And I work on things like when the government has a requirement or needs something, they will send out what's called a request for proposal. And this could be either within a big contract that you have or for a new contract. And so I also help work on all the NASA proposals that we have and help these legal advice on how to, what the proposal is asking for, if the items in the proposal that are required actually are what's going to be evaluated, make sure that matches, and do just general legal advice. And I also help prepare some parts of the volumes for the proposal. I also work making sure that we're compliant with our contracts that we have. I also negotiate the contracts directly with the customer. So I have a fun position of being able to have an external customer of NASA and get to meet a lot of different interesting people that way. And then also I have my internal customers at SpaceX, which are mostly engineers. So it's been really fun to kind of learn how to communicate effectively with engineers and understand what they're asking you. And then I'm also do like vendor agreements that are, most of them are related to what I do. So either stuff for the Dragon capsule or recovery for Dragon and things like that to make sure we can do our contracts. And sometimes I get to help out on weird legal issues. And that's basically what I do day in, day out. And then before SpaceX, I was a JAG in the Air Force, and I had 3 different stations. My favorite one was probably being an area defense counsel at Incirlik Air Base. It was like a criminal defense attorney for the military. And in between that, I did an LLM in space and telecom law at Nebraska.
All right. Thank you guys. Thank everyone for telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do and how you got there. We have some questions, but I just want to make a few remarks, especially from looking at this panel and looking at the last panel. There's a lot of different things that everyone has sort of exposed themselves to in terms of like areas of law or technologies. And I think it's important to point out, like, there are many types of space activities. And with every space activity, there are many types of actors that engage in those space activities. And you could have it at a very high level, like a government, or you could have it at extremely low level, like a subcontractor. And I think the point being is that you can find your niche. There's lots of things going on. There's lots of activities, lots of businesses being developed every year. And NASA initiatives on the space station, initiatives with being able to take private astronauts into space, they're all happening right now. And but I just want to bring maybe back down to earth just a little bit. And I think maybe the one question I'd like each of you to answer first is, what advice do you wish you had before you started law school or entered the space law community? And Julie, why don't we start with you?
Wow, what advice do I wish I had?
What would you wish somebody had told you when you're like, hey, I'm thinking about doing space law, that you know now?
Oh, well, back when I started to get interested in it, was a little while ago, and no one even knew what it was. So I guess I wouldn't have realized how kind of tangential I think most of the practices. Like, I get to work on very cool space contracts, but I didn't understand that, I wouldn't have known in law school that, oh, if you're not going to get to do like a think tank of space law and just do that more as an extracurricular activity. I think I would have liked to have that advice of going out and joining different space like organizations, and going to like the IAC, I think, is a huge one that people can do, even though it's expensive. But I think the payoff is huge because I've met so many people through that organization, even though I was already at SpaceX. If I hadn't been, I could have made a lot of contacts through that. And like Brad said, the Monfred Locks, I think, is a huge opportunity for students, because it's kind of ironic. Sorry, I'm going to tell the story, Brad, but I was actually one of his judges. And that night, on Saturday night, I was like, you're pretty impressive. I think, SpaceX has internships in our legal department. I think you'd be good for one. And he kind of laughed. He's like, yeah, I'm talking to Tim Hughes for one. I was like, all right then. But if he wasn't, I was fully gonna push him on to Tim and say, this back then, this kid is like really good. So I think things like that can really jumpstart your career. And just the recommendations you can get from that, I would definitely have wanted to know that.
Brad, do you want to?
Just a big thanks to Julie on that shout out. But I guess picking back on some of the themes that have already been shared, especially what you mentioned, Chris, like maybe I'll say sort of the advice I have, because it's what I would have loved to hear and kind of like expedite probably 3 years of my own sort of searching for the right spot for me. And it really is just that point that the industry is huge, right? I think the estimates from for those of you who don't know, there's a good consultant, Bryce Space and Technology, that does like an annual report on the space industry. And I think the number's like at $360 billion estimated industry-wide. And they segment that out over all the different types of players that Chris talked about, your operators, your service providers, your manufacturers, right? Upstream and downstream across the value chain. And I don't think I appreciated that as a 1L, I'll put it. I think as a 1L, I saw space law. I said, that's what I want to do. That sounds awesome. I love watching what all these companies are doing. And so I just kind of hopped around to different opportunities that seemed like they might be a good pathway with no real design or strategy behind it. There was a lot of good fortune, I'd say, and sort of where I've landed. But just thinking about that big picture, there are so many ways to get into the business of space as a lawyer. And so to the extent you can mine those resources that give you a full perspective on what the market really looks like, both from the commercial and government perspective, I mean, that I think is like a good knowledge base from which to then say, okay, if I wanted to work at Airbus, or if I wanted to work at SpaceX, or if I wanted to go work at the FAA or government, you know, what does that look like? So I'd say that, and then the other thing that's sort of a corollary to it is, you know, having people's bios on hand to just see how other practitioners got where they are is super helpful. You know, so I have always been deliberate about trying to find models of, you know, people's careers who I might want to emulate. And that's a function of the networking and, you know, people being, you know, participants at events like this, so that you can kind of start to see what a path might look like.
Cool. Joita?
I totally agree with Julie and Brad, and I'd also like to echo what Kelsey mentioned about trying to be as involved as possible. I was working with Space Generation Advisory Council for a long time when I was a student, and that was an amazing opportunity to kind of, you know, be exposed to the different facets of the space industry and kind of the space community in general. The International Space University is, of course, a terrific opportunity for networking again, and also for lawyers to have that sort of interdisciplinary exposure to the industry. I suppose I'd mention, you know, in terms of legal technical skills, the one piece of advice that I probably would have benefited from in law school is when we think of space law, particularly for those of us who are Manfred Lach's Moot Court alumni, we immediately think about the 5 international space law treaties. But when you are practicing in the commercial space industry, I don't know, I could probably count on my fingertips the number of times I've had to refer to the United Nations booklet of treaties. So I think it's really important to get your basics solid when it comes to contracts law, when it comes to, you know, commercial legal principles, and then extrapolating them to the space industry. That's one. And the second piece of advice is, yeah, try and be as involved and as active as possible. You know, SGSE, ISU, these are fantastic organizations. Try to attend as many conferences as possible. And in the current environment, I suppose it's probably less difficult to do that because, you know, you don't have to travel, you don't have to think so much about financing conference travel fees, so on and so forth. So yeah, try and be as involved as you can.
Kelsey?
Okay, so I'm going to echo a bunch of stuff that everybody else has already said because they're all such good points. I definitely think when I first started, I did the same thing Joita did, where I looked at those treaties and I was, you know, I checked out from the library this big thick book on, like, you know, international space law, and I just read that. That was like my first introduction. And now when I do a day-to-day, you know, project, most of it is contract drafting. It's taking space ideas but translating them into traditional contracting terms. So you really just have to get those basics, because that's what you're going to use. You're going to do it from a space perspective. You're going to look at things and know the industry and know how you want to set things up in that contract. But when you're writing the contract, you still have to be good at contract law. So I definitely think that's a good piece of advice. Also, kind of going off what Brad said, as far as multiple other jobs that are out there, there's just so many things you could do. And one thing that I started doing a little later in law school, but I wish I'd done as a 1L, is just like going on companies' websites and looking at their job postings. And as a 1L, you can look at that, you can be like, okay, this is what they're looking for, so that in 3 years you've checked off some of those boxes, and you know these different skill sets that would be useful. So I think, you know, admin law popped up for me when I was in my third year, I think I took an admin law class because I was just reading a lot about FAA regulations that apply to launches. And I saw that there's just so many parts of that that come into regulatory compliance. So it's finding those different things and working towards them so that once you hit the time where you're graduating, you have this list of this skill set that could be useful right off the bat. So I think both of those points are really good ideas. And then, yeah, just again, like I said in the beginning, just meeting everyone. And I know that's, you know, a little different now in Corona world, but just, you know, talking to anybody, feeling free to like cold email people. I sent out so many cold emails. That terrifies me too. I just don't like, you know, bothering people. But if you can get over that, and people are really nice, especially in this industry. Everybody I've met is so kind, so excited about what they do. So people are always pretty happy to talk to you about what they do. So yeah.
Yeah, and I certainly can echo all of these sentiments. When I was previously at Bigelow Aerospace, anytime I talk to students, as Brad and most of you know, I had an open invitation. If you emailed me, I'd take you out to lunch. How many people actually took me up on that? I think about 15 in 4 years. So, you know, I think that one of the big conceptions that I think, especially when I started out, was you have all these people who have very distinguished careers. They've maybe gone to very good schools. They've done some very interesting things, and you get a little intimidated. But I was fortunate enough, like when I was starting out and going in the path of space law, because I started out doing mathematical physics. I was trying to be a physicist. But I met a gentleman who's unfortunately no longer with us, Jim Rendelman. And Jim early on was a big supporter, got me involved in AIAA, followed my career all the way to Bigelow. And there are lots of other examples. And I think everyone should, and I want to echo again, Kelsey's advice, like people are accessible. They may be busy. They may not get back to you immediately, but people are by and large, in my experience, good people. They're accessible. I've never had anyone shoo me out, even when I was a student, and I've never shooed any student out for trying to contact me. So I highly encourage you to reach out, and we're certainly preparing internally on some additional programming that we will announce soon on, you know, get to know a space lawyer. So a lot of these sentiments will be echoed, and I think it's really important to get involved, look at the areas of law that interest you. And before we wrap it up, I want to get to a couple of audience questions from students. And I have 3 really good ones. So actually the first one is just for Joeita. Joeita, do you have any advice for space nerd law students in India?
Oh, wow.
That's how it was phrased.
Sure. So the first thing I would mention is that, you know, that the space industry is very closely tied to the defense industry. What that means is nationality restrictions are a real thing. And, you know, if you are thinking about it from a career perspective, then the slice of the pie that's open to international applicants, or for that matter, particularly non-US applicants, get quite restrictive due to ITAR regulations and whatnot. So that's something I think it's helpful to keep in mind to begin with, because that's something I had to really struggle with when I was starting my career, because half of the opportunities weren't even open to me. I was not eligible to apply for about, it's probably 3/4 of the job openings. But that about, I'd say, kind of, you know, echoing everything that my co-panelists mentioned, try and make sure that you are aware of all of the different kinds of opportunities that are available for space lawyers, whether it be in the commercial industry, whether it's in the public sector for a government role, or for even, you know, think tanks, organizations like Secure World Foundation, where you wouldn't have to, you know, navigate any nationality restrictions or anything like that. Or also large international commercial organizations such as SES, Airbus, Intelsat, who are pretty open with international applicants.
All right, so I think we have time for one more question, and I'm trying to figure out which one is a good one here. But maybe this one actually may be a good one to end on, and good to get your perspective on where you see things going in the industry. So I'll read the question here. With the economy the way it is, uh-oh, Alexa, stop. Sure to drink. With the economy the way it is a career in space law a good financial move compared to other sectors of law, or is it more of a passion project? Juita, why don't we start with you?
You're loving the difficult ones. Well, I'd say the former. No, not really a passion project. It might seem so, you know, when you're doing your master's research, you're writing your dissertation, it might seem very theoretical at the moment but once you are part of the industry, once you kind of have insight into the way you're contributing to pushing the agenda forward, no, absolutely not. I think it's, you know, you can have, if I can call it, a legit career in the space industry, much more than a passion project.
Julie?
Sorry, Chris, I didn't hear you the first time. Yeah, I agree. I think it's actually looking pretty good. At least I think that's one benefit of being in a company that is also a defense contractor or just a government contractor, and that the governments tend to always do pretty well generally, or at least in any economy. We've been, because we're part of the industrial base, you get to keep working, and you I don't think our industry has been as affected, at least for a government contractor, as maybe others. So I think it's going to be fine. And I think that there's always, as we grow and we realize and are able to use space in a way that is economically beneficial and also just beneficial for the world and science and advancement, that we'll keep doing that. And we have, you know, the passion to explore, I think, is inherent in mankind. And as you see, we're pushing more and more towards commercialization of space use resources and things like that. And so I think as much as that keeps pushing forward, that the industry will keep growing.
Brad, what's your thought?
Sure thing. So maybe I'll kind of speak from just my perspective as a U.S. regulatory lawyer at a big law firm, right? So I asked myself the same question when I was in law school. I was asking myself, does it make more sense to try and really find a company that might have an opening for me, or find an agency that I might be able to take an entry-level position with, or should I go sort of what sort of in the U.S. legal market is a more conventional route of putting my hat in the ring for the big law firm recruitment programs and trying to find a path that way. And obviously, by where I am now, I took the latter of those sort of paths, but not without intention, right? So I picked Akin Gump and the law firms that I was looking at because I knew they had a healthy area of practice and both the subject matter, you know, export controls and sanctions, that was particularly relevant to the space industry, and they had clients that I wanted to work for, right? And so it was that, I guess, intention behind my own search for a firm that allowed me to be in a comfortable position despite the economy we're in right now. And so, yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. I think there is room to have a successful career in all of the different pathways that we've talked about. I'd say it's not, I'd maybe reframe the question, not so much as like, you know, as a career in space law, you know, allow for, financial security, if you will, or something like that. It's more, can you get a job or not, right? And if you're gonna get a job, yes, right, you've got your job. If you can't get a job, that's where it's hard.
Kelsey, I'll let you have the last word.
Sure. So I definitely agree with a lot of what Brad said. I just think when you approach this, you should know you have to hustle. It's not with other more traditional law paths. I feel like there's a certain path you follow. You go to your job at your 2L summer and then, see if they give you an offer. There's a very clear cut, this is how this is done traditionally. And, people branch off from it, but it's nice to have that security that, this is how you go about getting a job. I don't think there's a lot of that in space. I think you have to be very open to all opportunities that come up. And I think you have to take all that into consideration. And I also, like I said, a lot of space law is traditional law. So it helps to build those skill set so that in the event, you need something to pay the bills while you look for your dream job, you can go do those things and build that skill set, which I'm sure will even help find the space law job that you want. So I think there's a way to chase this and also, have a backup plan in case, which for me, provided a sense of security to know that, worst case scenario, I have this skill set. But if you hustle, I think it's a great industry to be a part of, and it's growing, and it's so exciting because I feel like I've seen such an increase in jobs recently than I did when I was looking, but it's still a small industry. So I think, if you hustle and you are good at what you do and you're bringing passion to the project, it's not just a passion project, but it's a really great career to chase. So.
Well, thank you.
And Chris,
Yeah,
if I could chime on that, I suppose that the question made a reference to the current economic environment.
Yeah.
And I think COVID, while has hit a lot of industries, there are certain sectors of the space industry which is actually doing better than normal in this environment. For example, Earth observation companies, Planet, for example, is doing phenomenally post-COVID. So that's something to be kept in mind, that oftentimes you can't quite paint the space industry with a sweeping brush as other traditional sectors.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to close on. Space industry is very big, but it is fragmented into so many different avenues. And whether or not you are good at math or science, or you write well, or you really love just law, maybe you love civil procedure, maybe you love administrative law, maybe you love export control law. There's lots of avenues, I think, especially in the commercial world, to prepare yourself to get some interest in. And at Space Court, we're trying to provide as many opportunities to look into these areas of law and be able to support the future generation of space lawyers and lawyers who have to engage in all levels of space activities. So with that, I want to thank Brad, Joita, Julie, and Kelsey. Thank you for being part of this panel. And I think we're going to skip our break and we're going to go right into our keynote with Jessica Noble from NanoRacks. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.
First, it's a pleasure to have you here today to be one of our two keynotes. Jessica Noble is a longtime friend and has been counsel at NanoRacks for 2 years. I'm trying to remember.
2 years.
No, 2 years. And it's a pleasure to have known her when we were students. It was a pleasure to know her when we were coming up in the ranks, so to speak. And it's a pleasure to be now working with her in the space industry and space community. And I, given her life experiences, I think you're in for quite a treat. And thank you, Jessica, for speaking with us today.
Sure. Thanks, Chris, for inviting me, and thank you to the Space Court Foundation for holding these panels and these discussions. They are so incredibly important to the future of our industry. Now, thankfully, I've been able to have the opportunity to hear some of the previous panelists today, so I don't really want to rehash a lot of the same concepts they have gone over, but I will to kind of show you how some of the things that you've heard today have applied to my path and to my career to help me to the position where I am today. As Chris mentioned, I work as general counsel for NanoRacks. We are a small commercial space company that has, we've built ourselves on our relationship with NASA and the services that we provide on the International Space Station. So we have grown from merely providing space for experiments on the station and small, basically, we call them mix sticks, but they're the same concept as like a glow stick where you crack it and you can mix different chemicals or compounds in space to see how they react in microgravity, to offering launch opportunities both off of the International Space Station and on different commercial launch vehicles for cube satellites and small satellites. Coming up soon in November now, we are going to be launching our first piece of hardware, a major piece of hardware, to the International Space Station, our Bishop airlock. There's been a little bit of news about it recently. It's very exciting, but it's going to be the first commercial airlock on board the International Space Station. It's going to greatly expand the capabilities to be able to put experiments outside of the International Space Station to do additional testing in microgravity, to test out robotic applications, and to do continued small satellite and CubeSat launches without the backlog that there is now. So it's very exciting times in the commercial space industry. But what does that mean as far as what I do on a day-to-day basis? So as general counsel, I think you've heard a lot about the different roles that lawyers can play in the space industry and the knowledge base that you have. And like with any company working as in-house counsel, you have to be a little bit of a jack of all trades. You need to know a little bit about corporate governance, about transactions, about intellectual property, employment law, regulatory compliance. All of these things factor into the work I do on a day-to-day basis. I think Joyita even mentioned in her practice, she could count on her hand how many times she's had to reference the Outer Space Treaties, and I completely agree. It comes up every now and then, but it's more of it's a fun side project that comes up every once in a while and isn't really the day-to-day. But I will say that everyone's path to get to where they are in the space industry, it looks different. And what I want to talk to you all about are what I consider the 4 pillars of pursuing a career in space law. And those include persistence, networking, knowledge, and creativity. And I think you all have heard a little bit about each of those in some form or another from the previous speakers, but let me tell you a little bit about how that worked out as far as my path. When I entered law school, my focus was in international law. I went to the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and enrolled in their Comparative and International Law Institute. One of the elective courses that was offered was space law, which I took my 2L year, and absolutely fell in love with the subject matter and the opportunities to help an industry that is advancing humanity and rapidly. I've been in the industry now or in some form or another for the past 7, 8 years, and it's amazing to see what we've been able to accomplish so far. But at the time in law school, I did not really have the opportunities like this through the Space Court Foundation. I was working a lot of these things out on my own, doing my own research. And I was lucky enough to find out about the Space Law Moot Court competition and to participate while I was in law school. Fun side story, that is also where I met my husband. So you can find love in moot court. But additionally, when I went out to search for careers, I was initially thinking only of internships with NASA or with the FAA, or at the time, SpaceX was really beginning to become more of a well-known presence. So I was applying for internships at SpaceX, but did not really understand the true breadth of the space industry. At the time, didn't really understand the work that was being done in satellite communications. This was all information that came later. So I feel like I floundered a little bit in law school. When I graduated, I did not have a job lined up. Did not have any sort of financial security at the time. So it was a little bit of a dicey situation. And I took a chance on taking an internship on the Hill. And this is where creativity comes into play. The office that I interned in, it was a congresswoman from Florida, Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. They could not afford to hire me on at that point, but said, you can basically make this whatever you want. We're going to give you certain types of subject matters to work on, but what do you want? And so in that vein, I was able to create a space policy fellowship for myself. I made that my primary subject matter and would brief the Congresswoman prior to hearings of the Space Subcommittee on the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee meetings. And so that was really my way to get my foot in the door. I was hopeful at that point that I was going to be working further in Congress on space policy, but as happens, there were life circumstances that came up, and my husband was offered a position in New Mexico with Spaceport America. So I had a choice to make. Do I stay in DC, where I possibly could keep continuing on in this career, or do I go out to New Mexico and put this on hold for a short time? And I chose the latter, and it was a frightening one to make because my heart and soul was really in the space industry. But I took the opportunity to move out to New Mexico with my husband and took a position as an assistant district attorney in the DA's office. Now, let me tell you, trial and litigation experience as an attorney is one of the best things that I can recommend, no matter what you end up doing later in your career. The skills that you are taught as far as legal research, analysis, having to prepare and answer questions on the fly from the judge in a courtroom, were some of the most rewarding experiences, and I believe I've carried those skills with me throughout the rest of my career. And also talking about creativity, as you are going along in your path, look to these experiences that might be considered outside of the box to draw on them later on in your career if you do not get the space law job that you're looking for right out of law school. All of these skills lend themselves to the attorney that you become later in your career. So I ended up staying in New Mexico with my husband for 3 years before we moved back to the Washington, D.C. area. And during that time period, I began to work on reestablishing myself in the space law community within the DC area. Now, this is where networking comes into play as well. I've heard a lot of people talk about the different ways to volunteer and get involved in organizations, and I cannot stress how important that is. That is really one of the things that I think helped to propel me to where I am today as well, is volunteering with organizations like the AIAA or the American Society of International Law Space Law Interest Group, helping out and volunteering for events like the annual Galloway Symposium, making yourself known, showing people who are already established in the industry that you are willing to put in the work is so important. That is how people will remember you, and building up that reputation as someone who's willing to put in the work will serve you well later on as well. During this time period, I was also working these side jobs to try to pay the bills while I was pursuing the career in space law. So this was not glamorous work, but I was working with a contractor for the Department of Veterans Affairs, reviewing applications for small business owners who were applying for either veteran-owned small business status or service-disabled veteran-owned small business status, which included reviewing their corporate formation documents. Now, a lot of this was compliance-based, but having that opportunity to look through hundreds of corporate formation documents helped to cement for me what good corporate formation documentation looks like. It was tedious work, but so valuable, and something that now in my role as general counsel, I can look back on and draw from as I am looking at how I advise my client, which is NanoRacks, as far as their corporate governance. I knew that I could not stay there for long, and thankfully, as has been reiterated in previous comments, there are incredibly helpful people in this industry who want to see you succeed. One of those is going to be your next keynote speaker, Deihl Porras, who helped me along with letting me know about different opportunities that arose in the satellite industry, first with O3B Networks, now SEC Networks, and then with a consulting group called LMI Advisors. And these really helped me to get a good idea about the satellite regulatory realm and FCC regulations. It is an important knowledge base to have, and I relish those experiences. I will say I absolutely love human spaceflight, and that was really where my heart was. But getting to understand the regulatory regimes and the hurdles that some of our satellite companies have to face in complying with those, and how it's changed over the past 5 years, has really been a great experience as well. In my current job, don't really use that as much as previously, but it still comes up. So the other aspect in talking about networking, in addition to the help from folks like Deihl Porras and also Chris Hearsey, is getting to know folks who have been in the industry for a long time, the folks that have the jobs that you want to have one day. Reach out to them, speak to them, and even if the roles that you end up taking are not exactly what you want to be, or they may not involve that particular individual's line of expertise, you never know when you are going to need them or when that person can be helpful. You know, one of the best pieces of advice that I got from a mentor early on was just, you know, maybe 2-3 times a year at least, just reach out, send folks an email, and see what they're up to. Ask them about, you know, how things are going with their job. Ask them about how things are going in their life. Establishing those personal connections is also going to be key to helping further your careers. One of those personal connections that was extremely helpful during that time I was working with LMI advisors was in reaching out to an industry stalwart, Mike Gold. At the time, I was looking for the next opportunity and just reached out to him to ask him about his career path and about, you know, what his suggestions and advice would be for, you know, a younger attorney who was still looking to really gain a foothold. And it just so happened around that time that NanoRx was looking for a general counsel, and he was able to point me in the direction of the job posting and let me know that that was available. Having those people to help you out along the way is going to be key, because it's not always going to be the job postings that you see either on USA Jobs or Indeed or on the company's websites. Sometimes it's just going to be word of mouth, and having the people in your network to let you know when those opportunities arise is also incredibly important. So I made the leap, interviewed with NanoRx, and here I am 2 years later. And while I will say that not every single day is perfect, you're not going to necessarily enjoy every single day of your job. There's never been a day that I have woken up where I regret what I'm doing. I consider myself extremely lucky. So with that said, now that was kind of a long overview of the path. I am happy to answer any questions and see where I can help out.
Thank you, Jessica. So yeah, we do have some questions. I have one off topic but very serious question. Is it true? Okay. Is it true that your husband sent your engagement ring to space?
Yes, that is true. So when we moved out to New Mexico, we weren't married yet, but during his time working at Spaceport America, my husband was able to get a diamond ring manifested on a suborbital launch and hold it up here. But yeah, this ring has been to space.
Cool. You know, this seems to be a common question, but across all the panels. But you've had such a wide-ranging experiences that really, I think, prepared you for lots of different aspects of breaking into the space community. Mm-hmm. One thing that you, and I like I asked in the other panel, if there's one thing that you would have known before law school or getting into the space law world, what would it have been?
You know, what I really wish I knew about while I was in law school when I started getting involved was the breadth of the space industry, because I think when I started out, I had a very narrow focus in my mind that was on NASA, human spaceflight, and launch. But that's not all there is out there. There are communication satellites, there's remote sensing, there are companies that are looking to do research in, in pharmaceuticals and microbiology and food security. And there are a range of activities that are going on in space, and opportunities that are outside of just that narrow scope. And I wish that I had understood that at the beginning, because it might have helped me to broaden my search when I was looking for career opportunities early on.
And I know it can be a bit of a cliche in these types of events. We've known each other for a long time, but we actually met Manfred Locke's moot court competition. Could you maybe reflect a little bit about your experiences with the moot court competition, and maybe tell people a little bit about what you got out of it?
Sure. Manfred Locke's was I think my first opportunity truly making an oral argument. I didn't do, debate or anything like that in college or high school. So that was my first opportunity truly. I take that back. I did Model UN in college, but it was a little bit different than providing, a complicated oral argument before practitioners in the field. So I did not understand at the time the issues that I had with public speaking. And so Manfred really helped me to understand some of my weaknesses, and I think helped me later on, once I did actually go to work as a litigator and had to appear in court frequently and make oral argument and presentation of evidence at trial. It's a completely different ballgame. The other aspect of Manfred that really helped was truly diving into legal research. And of course, when you have your reading that you need to do for your classes in law school, and if you end up working on a journal, you do your research for your journal articles. But the amount of research that I had to do to prepare for writing the briefs for Manfred, I think was eye-opening, and in a lot of ways I have not had to prepare that much for any one individual case since then, but having that experience was absolutely necessary for understanding how to truly do legal research.
All right, one last question. What would you take with you if you could take one thing to the International Space Station?
Just one thing? I'm gonna say, there's like a whole manifest. You understand, like, astronauts get to take a lot of stuff to the ISS.
No, just one thing.
Just one thing. Come on, camera. Have to document the time on the ISS and get those shots from the cupola.
I'm sure that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Really appreciate it. Appreciate you taking the time, and it's really exciting to know that we've been friends for a long time, and it's intersected in so many different ways that people discuss today, whether we met at conferences or Manfred Locke's, or in the case of Daniel Porras, through friends of friends, if I recall.
Yeah, that seemed to happen a lot in Washington.
And we'll invite Daniel Porras to begin his presentation. And I'll briefly introduce Deihl. Deihl is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Communications at the Secure World Foundation. Previously, he worked as a Space Security Fellow at the UN Institute for Disarmament Research, where he focused on political and legal issues surrounding space security. I've known Deihl for a number of years now. We've been very good friends. I feel like all of us sort of started out kind of around the same time, working our way up in our careers. And so it's great to have you here today. You're based in Colorado now. And with that, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Hi, Jessica. It's good to see you. This is always a fun topic. Like, what would I have wanted to have known when I first started my job, or when I first started even looking at space law? You know, I have to agree with a lot of the other speakers that have said one of the great things that would have been good to know is just that space law is so much more than just a couple of very sort of narrow niche applications that a lot of us get when we first start reading about space law. But I got to be really lucky in the sense that I did get to work on some of those really narrow applications, which is the space law development at the UN level. You know, I think most everyone here probably knows the Outer Space Treaty and some of the other, you know, principles and declarations and resolutions that have come out of the United Nations. And it's been my great pleasure to watch that development firsthand. So for my little presentation, for those of you who are still on, I'm just going to walk you through my experience, how getting into space law happened for me, and ultimately how I got to be in some of the really great positions that I was fortunate enough to be in. And maybe some of you who are on Twitter might have seen that I made a reference yesterday about my experience, and it very much always reminded me of this introductory video of Kung Fu. It's an old television series that used to come out, and this kid wants to be admitted to a Shaolin temple, and he just has to stand there for who knows how long, weeks. The sequence makes it seem like he's just there forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And finally, they're like, okay, you've been standing here long enough, come on in. And it really felt a lot like that. One thing to know, though, is that back when I was first starting, and certainly where I was starting, I didn't really have a lot of references. I didn't know what space law was. I didn't know the UN had an Office for Outer Space Affairs. I came upon space law by accident. Bad joke with one of my international business law classes led me to doing a paper on what laws would apply to a space tourism flight. And then all of a sudden I found out, whoa, there's actually international space law, and there are treaties about space, and there's the UN deals with this stuff. So the first thing that I went out and did was I wrote an article for that class, and ultimately, because it was something really new and really fresh, and I hope I at least did a good job of writing it, it got picked up by my law journal. So like Kelsey, I was at the California Western School of Law, and I got my first article published in the the Cal Western International Law Journal. And I mean, this is actually kind of intimidating because I was just writing stuff on a whole new area that I barely just discovered and was trying to put something together, and wasn't sure what to do with it. So anyway, I contacted the Office for Outer Space Affairs and said, look, I'm a law student, I'm working in this area. I would kill to come and work for you guys. I mean, you know, to work at Copios and, you know, seeing how like the legal subcommittee does things, I mean, what an experience. And when I contacted Nicholas Hedman over there, he said, actually, we don't take interns because, well, nobody really cares about space law, and the interns just come out here to like travel. So back then, USA wasn't taking anyone. And it took me a couple of months of begging until finally Sergei Nagoda, who's still over there, took pity on me and said, fine, I'll have you come over here. But bear in mind, you might just be like shuffling papers. And that's essentially what it was. When I first got out to USA, they didn't know what to do with me. They didn't know if I was going to actually do any decent work. But I stuck my head down and just worked my ass off for the better part of 6 months, and just really tried to make an impression. And any opportunity that Sergei gave me, I really tried to get after it. The other thing that I started doing right away was networking. I found out that there was an International Astronautical Congress. I was in Vienna at the time, and the Congress was in Valencia, in Spain. Ooh, what a hard trip to make. But, you know, when I went on that trip, I met Diane Howard. I met tons of other people who ultimately became friends that I still know today. And Diane, being a really good friend, has just written to me and asked me to be on a call with her tomorrow morning. So, you know, that's how good of friends we became, that I would say yes. Anyway, so I did my internship at USA, and while I was there, I met the famous Ken Hodgkins. Ken was leading up the US delegation for the first, it was the first meeting of the International Committee on GNSS. And I managed to corner him and I said, sir, you know, what you're doing is incredible. Like, this is the kind of work I want to do. What do I have to do this work? And Ken basically said, well, there are like 3 places in the world where you can do this work: Vienna, Moscow, and Washington, DC. How's your Russian? And I was like, well, my Russian's, I don't speak Russian. And he said, well, then you're probably better off in Washington. So when I finished law school, I took the bar exam, packed up my truck, and moved to Washington. And I showed up in Ken Hodgkins' office, probably in like October of 2007. And I said, okay, I'm here. What do I do now? And Ken said, well, I don't know, go look around, see what you can find. So I just started, I found a job doing filing work, like just the most random job I could find in the DC court system. I was filing paperwork for trusts and estates, and working 2 other jobs just to kind of make ends meet, and then go into all the meetings that I could, and just trying to network as much as possible. And again, met a lot of really good friends who I still know today. But I went bust, broke, couldn't make it. The very last thing I did was at the Galloway Symposium, I met Steve Mermina, and Steve invited me to come to NASA just to like say hello, you know, meet a couple of people. I'd met somebody from NASA through my internship at USA. So, you know, left my CV and just thought, okay, I guess that's it. So I packed up my stuff and moved back to Texas with my tail tucked between my legs. But on the Monday after I'd met Steve, I called up to say hello and thank you. Just to say thanks for having me over and, you know, appreciate any help. And Steve said, stop. I just got a call from somebody over at SpaceX, actually. It was David Denherter, who was still legal counsel back then. He knows somebody in Rome who is looking for a space lawyer to come for 1 year to help finalize an agreement on space financing. Essentially, it was an international agreement that would help financing for space assets. And of course, at the time, I'm thinking, I have no job, I have no money, I have no friends, I have nowhere to go. Yeah, I'm more than happy to move to Rome. So that was March of 2008. I just turned 27. And yeah, next thing I knew, I packed my stuff up and I went to go work for the International Institute for the Unification of Private Law. Some of you may be familiar with the Cape Town Convention and the space protocol there too. It was a mess. We got in a huge fight with industry because there was some miscommunication about how this agreement should be done and how it should be negotiated. But that was my first real immersion in finding out about how space law and policies get done. And I ended up living in Rome for 5 years until we finally got the space protocol completed. I ended up working with a lot of governments, a lot of private companies, even though my name was mud in their books. And I just learned a lot about the practicalities of multilateralism. So when I started looking for a job after UNIDWA, it got really tough, especially because I wanted to move to the private sector. I thought, you know, that's where all the growth is. And I just spent 5 years trying to encourage commercial growth. You know, what now? Well, that was a hot mess because, like I said, I had a black mark on me. But I got a call from the UN Institute for Disarmament Research up in Geneva. They had just been contracted to do some work on the development of norms of behavior, and it was going to be done very closely with the European Union and their initiative on the International Code of Conduct. So next thing I knew, I was ground zero for the Code of Conduct initiative. I got to go to all the big meetings. I was in the room for all of the discussions, and I got to see a lot of the stuff that happens behind the scenes for trying to come up with even just norms of behavior like that. And this was a really fascinating experience for me too, because I've never really done space security. I knew space law. I knew space, like the commercial side, but I'd never come at it from the defense side and from the security side. So that was also a big learning curve. And kind of, you know, just again, learning to adapt to a whole new set of problems. But because I'd already learned a lot about multilateralism and just dealing with ambassadors and ministers from different ministries and governments, that helped a lot, just to kind of navigate my way through the substance. But yeah, so then the code of conduct work finally came to an end, and I had to start thinking again, like, what am I going to do with myself? And it's at this point that, and I think this is important to note, life happened to me. You know, sometimes things outside of your career will step in and it'll kick you around. And this is something that today, when I look at interns and other people who I want to work with, I recognize the value of people who have had really hard life experiences and still got through it. It's important. It develops your character, right? So I had to take some time off, and a good way to get back into things was to go to school. So Steve Mermina and another good friend at Georgetown, Don Wallace, they said, hey, why don't you come get your LLM? Go back to school, get some structure, and get yourself back in the game. So I did, and I moved to Washington, started studying international business law. I wanted to, again, try to get into the commercial side of things. I also got a job with LMI Advisors, so there I got my first experience with the telecommunication side, the nuts and bolts of what is the space industry, really. And that was a good eye opener too. I learned a lot about radio frequencies. Geez, never want to talk about KU and KA band again. But it's really important stuff to know when you're developing policy. It's a whole huge side of the industry that affects space. But anyway, so I finished up with that, and was, still kind of looking around for some options. Started hanging out with Chris and Jessica a lot, Charles Stotler. We had a really great community of folks. Chris Johnson, Brad, just lots of cool space lawyers with great ideas. And then it so happened that UNIDIR was looking for the UN Institute for Disarmament Research in Geneva. There was a lot of work that was going to be coming up soon, and so they were looking to hire another space security fellow. And I just, again, happened to be right place, right time, right ideas, already knew the networks and knew the way things worked. So I got to go back to UNIDIR to do that project and to man the space security portfolio, this time on my own. And it was a hell of an experience. I had to bust my ass a lot to make some of that stuff work, but I ended up being the resident expert for 3 pretty big initiatives that have taken place in the last few years. So I was the in-house expert for the group of governmental experts on the prevention of an arms race in outer space, doing a lot of work on application of international humanitarian law to space, just trying to figure out what some of the possible policies could be, whether, what is an attack, what is the use of force on space, how do we even apply the law of armed conflict to outer space? These are some really great questions. Also got to be involved with the subsidiary body 3 for the committee for the Conference on Disarmament, which was also looking at PAROS, the prevention of an arms race in outer space, and also did some work with the Disarmament Committee. So those were, again, incredible experiences to be seeing ambassadors and ministers really hashing this stuff out about what could be a future treaty for the prevention of an arms race in space. Anyway, so UN is kind of tricky though. There's not a lot of job security in it. You get hired as a contractor or as a consultant quite a lot. But it was great 4 or 5 years total that I got to work for the UN. And Secure World Foundation came along recently and said, hey, Daniel, we need somebody who knows the space community and can help us build some partnerships. And you seem to know a lot of people, so why don't you come on over? And already this has been a great experience. Secure World is one of the few organizations that's really dealing with space law and policy across the board at really high levels. And getting to be a part of that and to promote and multiply those efforts is fantastic. So even though I'm not specifically still in the law right now, still get to practice my space law training quite often. So yeah, not a straight path by any means, but I think I would encourage all of you that if you're serious, if you, like myself, fell in love with the idea of space law and being a space lawyer early on, you just latch onto it and stick with it until you finally break it in. And as you can probably see, everyone in this community is really friendly. We love welcoming new people. I've had great experiences with my interns. Letitia, do you want to turn your camera on so you can say hi? Letitia was one of my most recent intern. I had a great experience with her. She taught me a lot. I know I was a bit of a tyrant, but she managed. Another great intern, Ben Silverstein, who's now writing papers and he's working at the National Nuclear Security Labs. Yue Yuan, who I had from China. She got a great article published recently in Space Watch Global about how China's been using space capabilities to fight COVID. And of course, Sebastian Klein, my very first intern, he's now working at the DLR at the German Space Agency doing international law. So, I mean, I couldn't be prouder of my interns. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer. And yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I'm just collecting the questions. Why don't I go to the one I've asked just about everybody. What is the one thing that you would have liked to have known before law school or right getting into the space industry?
Yeah, just like Jessica said earlier, I really actually wish I'd known just how big it was. So many opportunities to get in this field, so many great people who are willing to kind of talk to you and tell you their story about, you know, how you could potentially get connected. So I wish I'd understood just how big it was and how many different pieces and, you know, the supply chains, like how massive they are. You know, people can work in this industry from so many angles. I got fixated on the UN very early on, and that was a slog. But if I'd known about some of the other things, especially if I'd known about how the commercial sector was going to become alive, like I probably would have been looking into that area. It pays better.
So one of the things I don't know if you mentioned, but I'd love maybe to reflect a little bit on your perspectives, because we were briefly together on the the Hague Working Group on Space Resources. What did you learn from that process, and where do you kind of see things going with respect to space resources?
Lunar mining. Like with anything else, we can do it one of two ways. We can go fast and go alone, or we can go slow and go together. And it's really hard to go slow and go together. Lunar mining is probably going to be the work that's just done by a select few for a while. But technology eventually catches up. There will be a few actors, and I think they are going to have to be coordinating together. There is work to be done in that area. However, I think some of the more important work is still a little bit closer to home, and that work is going to be impacted by how we do lunar mining. So, for example, I keep telling folks, space traffic management is the next big thing we're going to have to worry about, whether we like it or not. Physics is just going to dictate it that way. So SpaceX and Amazon and OneWeb and who knows who else is going to start launching mega constellations. We're going to have to start managing that stuff. That means everybody is going to have to agree on a set of traffic rules to do it. And that includes all the new actors. All the new actors who don't necessarily have all the fancy technology and all the fancy capabilities that some of the more experienced players have. But hey, guess what? It's an open pool, it's global commons, and they can enter the pool too. If the space mining activities get carried out in a way that pisses everyone else off, when it comes time to talk about space traffic management, they're going to say, you know what? We don't really care what you think. We're going to do this the same way you do it, which is just, you know, however you want. So for everyone that's paying attention right now and who's listening, I think it's important for folks to think, even if I'm like stuck in this little tiny niche and I'm working in this one very specific field, this is the space field, and the space field is very well connected. We're all like tied together by physics on this one, and by our love of space. Just be a little conscientious about, you know, what you're doing, how that's going to impact somebody else, and our use of space in the future.
All right, since you're getting all the hard questions, let me see if there's two questions I think I can combine. So a student asked about, what do you think are some of the most pressing and unanswered issues in space law that require attention through research?
Oof, okay, right now, really big issue that is affecting the space security discussion. We don't know how to apply a lot of international law concepts to space. There's all this discussion about like, oh, gaps in the space law. There are gaps here and gaps there, and it's caused, you know, the laws that we have right now aren't really responsive to our needs. Well, I don't know that that's necessarily true. For example, one of the big issues that we had was we don't know what the use of force against the space object is. So during the code of conduct discussions, everyone kept trying to protect their inherent right of self-defense, Article 51 under the Geneva Convention. Well, that's great, but what triggers your right of self-defense? Like, what does that use of force even look like? How do we apply that? And then moreover, what is self-defense? I mean, what is proportionality in space? We don't know any of those terms. So I would really love to see some work just being done on figuring out how to apply some of the basic concepts that we have, like the international humanitarian law, to outer space. And once we figure out how to apply those things that are already in place, then we can start talking about gaps.
Another question is, could you share a bit about how it is to be working with Secure World Foundation?
Man, you got to stay on your toes. Everybody who works at Secure World Foundation is they're at the head of their fields. Victoria Sampson, Brian Whedon, Chris Johnson, Ian Christensen, Crystal Hazelton. I mean, just to name, these are people who are everyday names, household names in this field. So just trying to keep up with them, making sure that, I'm on the same level all the time across all these different areas. It's a challenge. Yeah, I mean, even working with Peter Martinez, I got to know him during the code of conduct process, and he was one of the big voices who was trying to bridge the gap between the developed countries and the emerging countries. We've got this problem in space policy development that it's very much Western countries, so the Western European and other group, and then everybody else. And South Africa, the South African delegation, they played a huge role in trying to bridge those gaps. So, I learned a lot about diplomacy from Peter, and now being here with him at Secure World, and he gets so excited about stuff. Yeah, on my toes all the time.
All right, so I think we have time for one more question, and basically it's, what do you want to leave young professionals and students with to guide them? What kind of advice would you give young professionals and students as they develop their careers, as they look into different areas of space law and the space community?
Something Jessica brought up as well, creativity. Nobody knows the answers to a lot of the questions that get asked in space law. And I think that's why a lot of people get drawn to space law. It's so new, and the drawing board is still very open, as it were. Lots of the questions that you have and that people are wondering about don't have an answer. And people like me and like Chris and some of our other friends, yeah, we talk like we know the answers, like we have really strong opinions on things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's right. So whatever you're bringing to the table, it's just as valid as anything the rest of us think. Yeah, be confident. Get your nose down at first, of course, like learn from the people who have come before, try and pick up on it. But at the same time, if you start getting ideas and thoughts and notions of your own, run with it. They're just as good as anybody else's. It's wide open right now.
I think that's great advice. Well, thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you for joining us today and rounding out our program. With that, I will bid you adieu and we'll move into closing remarks.
Thanks, man.
So thank you everyone for sticking around for our very long program, but we thought it was important to provide the broadest and comprehensive perspective for students and young professionals. And I can say that if this program had existed 10, 15 years ago when I was starting out my career in the space industry, it probably would have given me a lot of different ideas on where I could have gone. And I think that one of the things that I sort of took away from all of the panelists and speakers today was there certainly isn't one right way, or there is a right way to break into the space community or the space legal community. I think there's lots of different avenues. And I think one of the other takeaways that I got from the discussion was, I think it's also important to note that we all didn't go to the same law schools. not all of us were in the same networks, but there were certain avenues, certain networking opportunities that brought us together. And space is very big. It's not only big at the industry level, but it's also big at the conference level. There's lots of different things going on. There's international events, there's domestic events, and obviously not all of us can go to all of them. And there's been a few that I think historically have really brought everyone together. I think certainly the International Aeronautical Congress, IAC, is one. Another, I think, big one for many of us is the Galloway Symposium, which will celebrate, I believe, its 15th year running in December. You know, one of the things that we hope that you get out of this event today, this program, is lots of ideas about what you could do. Not only if you're interested in interning with the Space Court Foundation, but just in your own careers. Maybe there's paper topic ideas that you've now popped into your head just over the last couple hours because you've heard someone mention some very interesting area of law. Or maybe you realize, oh, I should probably think more deeply about my 2 and 3L years. Or maybe I should think deeply about what my thesis topic might be in an LLM program or a DCL, SJD. Lots of schools offer different types of postgraduate programs. Now, one of the other thing I think that came out, regardless of the panel and the speakers, is government contracts and procurement, export control, IP law. All of these things are accessible, available, understandable. There's lots of good people working in these areas, lots of good jobs that require this type of expertise. So I think it's really important for you as a young professional and student to find your niche. You know, what do you want to do? And be flexible. I think as many of us have mentioned in this program, that we all came by it from different avenues, and we took those experiences with us. And certainly two of the foundational things for myself and many of the people on the committee today, or sorry, on the panels today, was membership in the International Institute of Space Law and being a part of the Manfred Locke Space Law Moot Court program. If you want to find space lawyers and just space lawyers, that's where you're going to find them. And other than the Space Court Foundation. But if you're looking professional society or you're a student looking for something to do to actually work on a space law problem and get sort of sink your teeth into what it's like thinking about public international law, thinking about space law, thinking about how space activities and national law interact and the rules that come about. These are important. One of the most important objectives of the Space Court Foundation is the rule of law and the promotion of the rule of law. But for us to be able to do that, we need to understand what the law is. And as Daniel mentioned, that there's lots of areas where it may be unclear. There's lots of areas that may be undeveloped, and there's certainly lots of areas that I certainly believe, and we at Space Court believe, that are understandable and maybe don't have such a big gap between them. Now, let me end by saying thank you to all the panelists and the speakers. And for the students out there and the young professionals, please go to spacecourtfoundation.org. We have rolling applications for our intern program. And please continue to support Space Court. We are on Instagram, we are on Facebook, Twitter, and in particular YouTube. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, we have recorded this program and we will put a record of it on YouTube. And you can come back to this video and also feel free to send us a message and either on social media or via email, and we will be as quick as possible to get back to you and figure out how we can help you. But in addition to supporting on social media, we'd like to announce for the first time that we do have a merchandise store called Celestial Objections Apparel, which is on Teespring, and you can find the link on our website. So with that, let me finish by saying thank you to all the officers and the board members who have helped put Space Court Foundation together. Thank you to everyone that has made this a success, and thank you to the interns who will help us lay a good foundation for the future of space law and the future of space law research. And with that, I say thank you for joining us, and look out for our next video series, which will be probably in a few weeks. All right, thank you. Have a good day.